Well, welcome everybody to another BIM broadcast. It's been a while since we've last uploaded. Today's date is February 9th, 2018. We haven't uploaded in a little while due to some technical difficulties, and I believe we've got those ironed out. This show will be rather telling of that. We'll find out how the hardware and the software involved all works today. But today we're going to be joined by a special guest. We've got Don Rasmusson with us, and he's an applications engineer over at CAD Technology Center. He helps lead up a lot of the MEP specializations in-house. And so we're going to be talking with him about anything related to MEP. Now, if you've got any questions, we encourage you to throw them into the live chat. And if you are watching this as a recording after the fact, we encourage you to comment on the video, ask questions, or get a hold of CTC and Don directly. And we're more than happy to answer any questions you have and workflow advice and whatever as it relates to Revit MEP. So, Don, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Hey, man, my pleasure. It's been a show that we've been wanting to have for a while. In fact, BIM Broadcast came about partly because of some suggestions that you had made and some ideas you threw out there. So we kind of owe part of this show to some of your vision as well. So let's kind of talk a bit about who you are and how you got to be at CTC in the first place. So I know that I just mentioned you're an MEP specialist. Who knows Revit inside and out, backwards and forwards, right? You know it pretty well, I would think, right?
Oh, yeah, I would think so too. As well as somebody can possibly know a piece of software where the goalposts are constantly moving.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit about how you got started in the world of MEP in the first place and how you got into software and BIM.
Okay. Well, I often tell people that I didn't choose MEP. MEP chose me. I was lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending upon how you look at it, to have a father who owned his own mechanical contracting firm. And he also didn't believe in summer vacations or school breaks. So I was told that I had to go to work. I basically grew up in a sheet metal shop and a piping fab shop. Basically, since I was about 8 years old, I didn't have a summer vacation.
Nice.
So
well, not nice if you're 8 years old, but nice for us.
Well, see, when you're 8, you don't work a whole heck of a lot. You're just kind of always there, right? But you're paying attention to certain things.
Oh yeah.
But by the time I was 10 years old, I had got my first quote unquote paid position in the shop. It was my job to go around with a magnet and pick up all the scrap metal and cut it to length and make slips and drives out of it. Nice. I got paid a nickel a slip and a nickel a drive. So I've been around this industry literally my entire life. I didn't get into the software until I ultimately wound up going to school for mechanical design. Graduated from Dunwoody, which is a pretty big tech college here in Minnesota, and got my first job out of Dunwoody with a company called General Sheet Metal. And shortly after getting that job with General Sheet Metal won its first Revit contract, and we quickly realized how much trouble we were in because no one had ever used Revit
right
to do what we were going to do. And so I had to learn very quickly. Of course, anybody who's been in contracting realizes that the margins are kind of small. And when you underbid a project, there's not a whole lot of money left over to purchase training or let alone the software and the upgraded hardware and everything else you would need. So we were basically in a position where we had to buy a new computer, buy new software, and Donnie got to learn everything on his own.
Nice.
And thank God for CTC, as crazy as this sounds, guys. The real reason I'm working at CTC is because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for CTC. I could call them up and ask them questions whenever I needed to, and they really helped that learning curve be not quite as it would have been without them. And so a huge thank you, not only to you, Shawn, but everybody at CTC who worked back then that helped me get up and running.
Hey, it's all about the teamwork, man. We're all about getting people answers, and we can do that because of the teamwork. Now, I do notice, guys, in case you're going to comment back to us, that we have a little bit of lag in the video. We do understand that sometimes the internet decides to lag out, and I noticed just a flash on screen here that Skype said I got some poor network connection. So we are doing this. We are hosting this call through Skype, and we do understand that sometimes it might lag out. It is what it is. So. All right. So yeah, so you kind of got thrown into the world of MEP from childhood, and then you got sort of by default thrown into the world of Revit, and got some on-the-job training. Now, what would you
Yes.
recommend, having that experience, what would you recommend for other contractors if they know they're about to be put into a Revit project? Would you recommend on-the-job
Uh,
training, or would you recommend something
I
else?
would, yeah, I would not recommend on-the-job training. On-the-job training just leads to cost overruns,
Oh, yeah.
and it can be a nightmare for a project.
Right.
Obviously, you want to get started as early as possible, right? You want to try to come up with a plan for implementation, come up with a plan for the project, and those things are often separate from each other, right? We're going to use the project plan to build on the implementation plan, not the other way around.
Right.
And a lot of firms get into that position because they approach it from a project perspective, not from an overall implementation perspective. Revit is one of those very frustrating things where if you don't have some overhead positions, or at least some people dedicated to some overhead time to keep Revit kind of in tune and running and working efficiently, you're going to run into problems. If you try to do this on a per project basis, you basically have to put in every single one of your estimates that there's a 20 to 40 hours of oops time, if you will,
Right.
when Revit doesn't work the way you expect it to.
Yeah. So you're saying get in as early as possible, of course, right? Because Revit is a big technology. It's got a learning curve. It's its own software. It's not AutoCAD. Let's kind of
Absolutely.
take a step back and talk about, when did Revit first come out, so people can understand, a little bit of its history. So, do you remember when Revit first came out, Don?
Well, Revit came out in 1997,
Right.
right? Uh, Autodesk purchased it I want to say
Three.
2006 or something like that,
2003.
2003.
2003, 2004, it was
Okay.
finalized. They announced it and finalized it the same years.
Yeah, my first Revit experience was with Revit 2009
Right.
version. The 2009 version, for anybody who was in it for MEP, was pretty dismal. I guess is
Yeah.
probably the most appropriate word to use here.
Was that
We didn't
Revit
see,
Building Systems at the time, or was that Revit MEP already?
I believe it was Revit Building Systems.
Building Systems, yeah.
MEP came in like 2010, between 2010 and 2012, somewhere in there.
Right.
And then we saw a massive jump forward and actually got MEP functionality in 2013.
Right.
Right. You couldn't even do a pipe system in Revit prior to 2013.
Right. Yeah.
And
So
so,
early on, if you guys had some bad experiences with Revit MEP specifically early on in its release cycle, and it gave you kind of a bad taste in your mouth because it was kind of a frustrating experience, it's been much improved since then. Now, there's still some things you're going to struggle with, mind you, but it's much improved since its original releases. So if you haven't looked at it in a while and you're kind of wondering, you should take a look at Revit again here in the near future. So,
no, absolutely. The productivity gains that we've seen since 2013 are just astronomical, guys.
yeah.
Kudos to Autodesk, too, because at least initially, Autodesk didn't team up with MEP style people to kind of make Revit an MEP useful tool. That changed about 3-4 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
When they started looking at bringing the fab in and things like that, they started actually building teams at the Autodesk side of people who've used MEP before. So not only Revit MEP, but AutoCAD MEP and the fabrication offerings. And
Yep.
they're really trying to hone this thing into a very useful tool for each specific trade in the MEP industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I know I've worked with a couple of companies and helped them implement Revit, specifically MEP, across the nation. I know you've worked with a handful as well, probably more than a handful at this point, probably a couple hundred at least, I'm guessing. But
Yeah.
what have you seen
Yes.
as yeah, what's that?
Oh, yeah, definitely a couple hundred. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
What have you seen as common struggles that pretty much every firm you run into kind of has with Revit MEP? What's the biggest issues?
Probably the biggest issues that we run into, and just a little shameless plug here, my Implementing Revit MEP webinar series covers a lot of this. It's on our .io page of my mini training.
Yep.
Some of the biggest issues that I tend to see them struggling with are just some standards with symbols,
Right.
some standards with data. Those are the number one things that we struggle with. The second thing that we struggle with is understanding that Revit is not a drafting tool.
Right.
And you're not going to be able to use Revit like you did with CAD. For those of you listening, if you're still confused about what the differences are, the way that I typically explain to people is that Revit is the world's worst drafting tool because it was never intended to be a drafting tool.
This is true.
Revit's a database of parts. It's an intelligent database of parts.
Right.
And your success with Revit really hinges upon that database. It can be a wonderful experience with everything standardized and the database built, and then things just work and everything moves smoothly. But if you have a hodgepodge of parts, some work and some don't, or if you have a hodgepodge of data where someone didn't bother to look to see if that parameter or that piece of data already existed and created their own, Revit can spiral out of control within the matter of a week with just a couple users or one user going rogue on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so standards enforcement is probably the second biggest thing after we create the standards. That's the hard part. And I actually talk about that a little bit in my implementing too, because no one ever really covers enforcement, right?
Yep.
And we've got to talk about enforcement because once we've spent all this time, money, effort developing a standard, we don't want to lose it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when just like you said, you spend all this time, you're investing your time building a bunch of standards, and it could literally be hundreds to thousands of hours of time putting together these standards. Many of these companies we talk to on a regular basis, they've had AutoCAD standards for years, and they don't really remember how long it took them to put them together because they kind of organically formed because the whole industry was slowly moving towards CAD in the first place. Well, in the case of Revit, much of the industry has now begun to move to Revit already, but few people are sharing their standards. So because of that, you guys kind of have to invent your own BIM standards, building information modeling standards, and it's going to take you time. And once you develop those, you don't really have an easy way of forcing people to follow them. The best way to force people to follow any standard is not to force them, but to make the standard so easy to follow that it's the path of least resistance. That's what I think.
Yep. No, I completely agree.
So, but you definitely need to have a role in the firm that somehow is enabled to enforce those standards and to monitor and maintain those standards on projects that are going live. Because like Don just said, you can very quickly see a project go south, and that's where a lot of people get really bad tastes about Revit because, man, that project, when it goes bad and you can't get your document set done because people were screwing with the data in the background, and you start reverting to text and it becomes, like Don said, the worst drafting tool ever. Yeah, that can be frustrating. I mean, if you're going to just draft in Revit, use AutoCAD. I mean, let's be real.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Revit is not a drafting tool.
Oh, absolutely. There are certain applications, certain projects, even certain MEP totality firms that really don't do projects that would require Revit.
Right.
We have a firm that I deal with here in the Twin Cities that is basically a big TI contractor. So they're filling out spaces in big office buildings, or they're building out spaces for retail or something like that. They don't have any control over what the situation is when they walk into that. That just simply is what it is.
Right.
And so the amount of time that it would take them to incorporate existing levels of detail into a Revit model, the time's just not there for the turnaround on the overall project.
Right.
One of the biggest things with me, guys, and as far as MEP goes, I'm not here just to push Revit, right? I want the solution that best fits your firm, best fits the projects that you do. And I would never recommend to that particular contractor that you buy Revit.
Yep. Whenever you talk with the technical specialist at CTC, I think you're going to find that too. Like all the CTC guys over there, the techs especially protect the client more than the pocketbook of CTC, and that's led big to the success of CTC, right?
I would think that's a direct contributor to our success at CTC. We're solution providers. We're not mouthpieces of a particular software creator.
Right.
We want to give you guys the best options, the best solutions. And our role as isn't necessarily to make up your decision or make up your mind for you. It's just to make sure that you have all the pros and the cons of whatever decision you're trying to make, and you get to make that. We just want to make sure that you make educated decisions.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So, you were mentioning, some of the big things that you see in pretty much every firm, right? The lack of enforcement, the lack of standards, and the need to develop that from scratch. So what have you seen for solutions out there that people have done? Like, do they hire a person internally to specially manage Revit? Are they buying some outside toolkit? Like, how are they getting off the ground and actually getting into Revit in a meaningful way when Revit is a requirement or is a benefit to their project workflow?
It's kind of a combination of both. Obviously, since I'm here with CTC, we see a lot of CTC tool purchases. We see a lot of course, those tools would count our mechanical and electrical productivity packs and the combined electrical plumbing productivity pack. But we see a combination of purchasing those things to kind of get you a standard right away, I guess is the best way to describe it. We've had a lot of even larger firms who already have a standard purchase a lot of those packs simply because it's easier for them to implement something that's done rather than sit through months and months of meetings to argue about should we call it voltage or should we call it voltage nominal,
Right.
To take that the next step, I feel that you still need to have someone on staff who's a BIM manager or a BIM champion, somebody who's tasked with not only keeping the users of Revit running, because you want them running at utmost efficiency, right? And it's no secret that an MEP, in every single project, you are going to have to attain a custom piece of content.
Right.
There's just no way around that. And just for that simple fact alone, you don't want your users who are doing your design to have to stop and make that custom piece of content work with Revit, right? That's something that you would like a BIM manager to be able to do so that your designers can just simply keep designing and basically keep moving forward, keep the project going. So having that person, whether that's a 100% overhead position or that's siphoning off somebody's time to say for like maybe 20 hours a week, 10 hours a week, they focus on implementation of specific families or workflows inside of Revit. Those are the people who actually have the most success. And obviously that's driven by the size of the firm, right? A giant firm can afford to have maybe more than one person or may have the necessity of having more than one person filling that BIM manager role and dealing with their content, dealing with their workflows, dealing with implementation. And there's a reason it's called a BIM manager, right? It's not a Revit manager.
Right.
It's a BIM manager.
It's all about the information management.
Revit and not just families.
Yeah.
Correct. And that information can come from lots of different sources. I have never been on a project where where everybody on the project has only used one piece of software to make the project.
Right.
We use lots of different pieces of software. And the BIM manager's role is not only to keep Revit running, but to understand how those different pieces of software communicate, what are the best processes to run internally that are most efficient for your company, all those things that you would want them to keep straight, basically, and take that off the plate of the people who are just doing regular design.
Right. And, a person who's in that role needs to, at some point in their days, be dedicated to those tasks. You can't be doing both design and BIM management simultaneously because design and engineering will always win out. That's where the companies make their money, right? So if you have a project that's got deadlines, you're going to put BIM management on a back shelf. You're just going to. So unless you've got dedicated time, and that's one of your roles and you have to achieve those tasks, great. If you're splitting, half engineering, half BIM management or whatever the case may be, make sure that time really is dedicated though, and you are diligent about it. If you're going to be the BIM manager, be the BIM manager. Like, be that role, be that person, because it is a dedicated role. And it does mean you won't be doing as much engineering. I've got architects who come to me and are like, oh, I'm going to be the BIM manager but practice architecture. They end up either practicing architecture or doing BIM management. Engineers, same thing. Either you're an engineer or you're doing BIM management over time. Especially up front. It's
even more crucial for engineers.
Yeah, I think so too. Because it's architecture, there's a lot of standards that are already out there. It's been around a bit longer. It's been mature a lot longer, right? Like Don said earlier, Revit first came out in 97 and it began to become very popular in the early and mid 2000s for architecture. And then structure and MEP engineering, that didn't come until later, and it didn't really mature until way later, right? You were saying, what, 2012, 2013 time frame? Yeah.
2013 was the first MEP offering that actually made sense.
So architecture and to some degree structure has an advantage over the MEP trade in Revit, just because you've had content and standards longer. Structurally, there's not as much to customize as much as there is for architecture and MEP, but MEP, you guys have a lot of content. I mean, MEP is 4 or 5 different major trades kind of in that one MEP shroud. and you
Yep.
all work in different ways and you all have different needs. And if you are a full MEP company, you may need to have 3 individual managers who may not be full-time, mind you, but they need to have a dedicated role to help build content and establish standards and enforce those standards. That's critical. I mean, if you're going to succeed, that's just an important thing.
Yeah, you have to make sure those tools are in place, and you have to make sure those tools are well cared for,
Yep.
right? And it even divides up differently between contracting and engineering, right?
Right.
So they have 2 completely different ways of using Revit. We talk about engineers for a moment. The payoff for using Revit for engineers has been kind of this carrot dangled in front of their nose with Revit for a very long time. The payoff for engineers in terms of using Revit as a tool is using the engineering data, using the analytics that it can provide to you. Unfortunately, a lot of that comes with setup.
Right.
A lot of setup. The way I describe Revit to a lot of people is when you purchase Revit, you purchase a lump of clay. And it's your job to take that lump of clay and mold it into a useful tool that you want.
Right.
And a lot of people forget when they buy a piece of software, they think, well, I bought the software, I should be good to go now. In reality, I hate to be this kind of direct, but what you bought is a lot of work.
Yep.
To make this thing do what you want it to do. One of the things that always amazes me about Revit is that if you have the right people in place implementing Revit, or you have the right people on staff, like we have a few of them here at CTC, Shawn, you included, is that if you know Revit, and then you can kind of reverse engineer your thought process around what the restrictions of Revit are, you can make Revit do some very cool things that ultimately wind up saving you tons of time and tons of money.
Absolutely.
But you have to be willing to think about it outside of the box. And if you're a company trying to do this on your own, you kind of have to have somebody tasked with that, or you're never going to get there. Because like you just alluded to, right? When projects come in, projects pay the bills. Projects are where our focus should be. I would never tell a client, forget projects, focus on your BIM management. That's just foolish, right? So
right.
Attaining these things is just not as simple as getting the right people in the right positions. It's also getting the right thought process and the right company culture really in place. And that's, not an easy thing to do.
No, it is not.
In a lot of ways, yeah. And in a lot of ways, we talk about change. When we hire new applications engineers and I get an opportunity to talk to them, I don't talk to them about software. I talk to them about managing change, because that's ultimately what we do here. You could change the software, you could change all the tools that we talk about, but it doesn't change the fact that these are disruptive technologies because they're coming in and they're changing the way that a firm can work or has worked in the past, and they need to kind of change their way of thinking from the ground up in order to be successful with this.
Absolutely.
You can pound Revit into a drafting program, but then you're going to be unhappy. You're always going to be unhappy.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, anybody who's watching this at this point might be like, oh my gosh, Revit's not for me. I'm now frightened away from the tool set. So what would you recommend? And yes, Don, thank you for your comment. I have a comment here in live chat. Shawn, look at the camera. I keep looking at the desk at my keyboard. Yes, look at the camera. Thank you, Don. We do watch live chat, guys. What would you recommend to a firm who's now getting into this, thinking, "Wow, this feels incredibly daunting because, I have all this work ahead of me. I bought a bunch of work. What am I going to do? Like, I don't have time for this. I have to build BIM right now, right? I thought I bought BIM, but I bought work. You can't buy BIM, by the way, guys. BIM is a workflow. Revit is not BIM. Revit is a building information modeling tool, but it is not BIM in and of itself. Like Don said earlier, it is it's a bunch of work, and it's one tool in a set, and you might use a bunch of other tools. You never do a project in one tool overall. So it is a tool, and you have to learn how to use your tool. But Don, so what would you recommend about to a company who is kind of jumping into Revit and they're just kind of getting into it now feet first, and they don't really know where they're going, and they don't have necessarily the ability to hire a person full time, or they don't have the experience to build this up, but they got to be active fast? What would you say to that company?
Well, the first thing I'd say to that company is go ahead and give me a call.
Right.
As soon as BIM broadcast is over, pick up the phone. I'll be here for the rest of the day here at CTC. Give me a call.
Actually, Don, you're chained to your desk, right? We don't let you leave. You just have like a dog bowl, and you're just always there, right?
Well, that's the lovely thing about cell phones is that's the electronic leash right there, right?
Exactly.
So if you ever got your email on your cell phone, you're never off work.
That's right.
But to those firms, I would definitely say, start by giving me a call. Please, for the love of all that is holy, don't wander in the dark like I had to. Don't beat your head against the wall and try to make it work without having the knowledge base there.
Right.
Part of the reason I'm here, guys, is because I didn't want anybody else to have to go through that. Right. I'm here so that you don't have to. Outside of giving me a call, coming up with a plan, coming up with some standards, sitting down and talking about your symbology, right? Most firms I deal with have one set of symbols for this engineer, one set of symbols for that engineer,
right,
and one set of symbols for the third engineer. That we can't do in Revit anymore. That was something that we could get away with in CAD because changes were relatively quick. The changes inside of Revit aren't that quick.
Right.
Right. And they're driven by a lot of other factors.
I believe in standards as much as the next guy, and that's why I bring all of my standards with me wherever I go.
Well, we try to do that too as part of the reason that nice little segue there, Shawn, into the mechanical electrical productivity pack.
Oh no, I'm not gonna let you go there just yet. And that was actually more of a joke because I actually had a guy in a company when I tried to encourage him to follow the company's standards. That's exactly what he told me. I believe in standards. That's why I bring my own. Like, that's not the standard, man. So you gotta, this comes down to that BIM enforcement discussion we talked about earlier. When you're in a firm, and if your role is BIM management, you are also in some cases BIM enforcement, and you have to be enabled for that, and you have to get your management on board to help you for that, because you will get people who go rogue. You will, because they're gonna think they know something better, or they're gonna read something on the internet on a blog, or watch a YouTube channel, or listen to one of Don's classes where he said something about something and they thought they understood it, and they're going to go and do it their own way in their own project. And while it's good to have entrepreneurs in a company, it's bad when it inhibits an actual workflow in Revit and actually causes slowdowns and causes pain. So that's where those managers come into play again.
Yeah, and there's certain ways of encouraging that person. And certain ways you can create test environments where you can have that person try out all these different ways of functioning and things like that. Those people usually are driven people who kind of take that kind of work home with them, right? That something is like, wow, I heard I can get Revit to do this. I'm going to figure it out. But they're driven to figure it out. They're not driven necessarily to do that for the profit of the company as much as they are driven to understand how Revit works and how it can be used better. That's good for both parties, right? But when it comes to enforcement, I'm not big on authoritarianism.
Agreed.
I'm not big on you will do this because I said so. For me, it's more about inspiration. And if anybody is interested, there's a great psychological study online, and the name of the study is called "The Fine is a Price." And it's actually the one I use for part of my implementation webinars. Basically, inside of that study, they start unpacking, why do people really act the way they do when it comes to laws, rules, standards, those sorts of things. Most of that study is that if you have to go explain why your way is better to somebody else, right to their face, or you have to explain why you did it the way you did and why it's you feel it's better, but it caused cost overruns or something to a process not to work the way it is. You're much less likely to do those things if you have to stand there and be held accountable for it in front of the person that it directly affected. And I'm much more in line with that style of standards enforcement than I am saying, okay, well, here's a manager. The manager says you're going to follow these standards, and this manager may or may not know why the standards are in place or what's driving the standards. But if they see you out of the standards, they have the right to reprimand you. I know that that's a very traditional way of looking at business. I don't think it's the way we move forward into the future. There's way too many moving parts now to run every business with a factory model. We need to stay away from that.
Now, I do want to add one thing to that. You'd mentioned that, it's not really a good idea to just sit down and tell somebody, hey, I told you to do it this way, and that's why you're going to do it this way. I like the whole idea of giving a reason. However, and this kind of goes to one of the comments that just came through the chat line to some degree, if you've given an explanation and you are the BIM enforcement and it's been something that's been, agreed upon or it's industry standard or whatever, at some point you just kind of have to go, look, I need you to do it that way until you can prove it's a better way, not on a live project. So sometimes you do have to lay down the law a little bit and go, because I told you so, if a person's being combative, not that the person commenting is being combative, but that wasn't my intent, but just saying that, it's always a good idea to try to explain it as best you can, to give enough reasons. And then when it comes right down to brass tacks, if it's your job to be that enforcement, to go, look, it's how we do it. And I've given you good reasons why, not just it's how we do it. It's how we do it is a good way to get people to rebel. But I want to talk back to another question that you had mentioned earlier, which was, or another comment you'd mentioned earlier, which is those people who are trying to find better ways or different ways are driven people. Don't squash them, right? You want those people. You need to enable them, but you need to enable them in a safe environment, not on live projects, right? That's critical. Because live project entrepreneurship is a bad
critical.
idea. Yeah.
So. No, and if I had someone like that at my firm, say, for example, that's not the easiest thing in the world to recognize. Right. You have to really kind of have some boots on the ground or some mid-level or lower level management that's kind of paying attention to some of those situations and can actually help to pluck talent, if you will, from the bowels of the guys sitting in cubes doing designs all day. Guys who are really driven and come up with really creative workflows. I'm not going to name names here, but I could about some of the greatest people I've ever known doing things in Revit, and that's exactly how they got started. They were interested in manipulating the software to have it do what they needed it to do, and they kind of threw the rule book out. They said, well, let me learn it my way, and then I'm going to figure out how I can manipulate it. Those are the people where, like, say, for example, if the company has only a desktop for them to work on, I'll go buy you a laptop. Feel free to take it home. Feel free to take it on the weekends. Try to do things outside. Obviously, we set up an environment that's completely separated from projects, so you're not affecting anything internally. But those people need to be encouraged, because in a lot of ways, there's your free BIM management minor league development into something that can be extremely effective in a couple of years, probably.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, there's a lot of cases where, companies, as they grow into Revit, need more than a BIM manager. They need a BIM committee. And those are the people that you want to seek out early on and enable them so that they feel empowered and they feel like their opinions are being listened to. And while they are following the rules more or less, they are also enabled to be a part of that committee and to give advisement and do, look, as a BIM manager, you can't really, I don't think one person can know all three disciplines of MEP, right? I don't think it's possible.
I completely agree with you.
Not fully. I mean, you can know about them, you can be pretty good at them, but I don't think one person can be a master of all three, right? An electrical engineer is an engineer for a good reason, and they have some really cool tricks they can pull in Revit electrical, whereas a mechanical engineer has their own specialties. And unless you're like, I don't know, maybe I'm just, wrong, and someone's going to correct me on YouTube, and by all means, go ahead and do that if you're this super genius. But like, if you've got like a PhD in all three, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering, fantastic, like, more power to you. But I'm going to make a guess you're probably not a Revit specialist at that point, because you're probably focusing more on engineering. I could be wrong.
Exactly.
But, I don't think I am.
A team of I don't think you're wrong either, Shawn. And a team of authority is something that you always need to put together. And it's almost like you watched my mini trainings on Revit MEP implementation. You keep bringing up all the topics that come. But yeah, a BIM manager is just the start. Right. A BIM manager is not going to be able to do everything on their own. They'll be the one tasked with not only knowing the specific piece of software, but other pieces of software and how they integrate, but then how all the different trades need to use their software and what will work and what won't work, and then how to prioritize those different internal processes you want to take advantage of. But you will always need a team of authorities on mechanical design, electrical design, fire protection design, plumbing design, hydraulic design, depending upon how you divide it up, pipe fitting design versus regular old plumbing design. So it's a pretty deep rabbit hole. For most firms, they specialize in a few of those. They don't specialize in all of those, but there are some big firms that do everything. And they have, those bigger firms who do everything have a bit of a challenge on their hands because you've got lots of moving parts and this all takes time. The question is always, how much time should it take? Not the fact that it's going to take time. I think people understand it's going to take time, but having say, for example, principal owner's view of how much time they think it should take versus a BIM manager or this committee's time of how much they think it should take. Those two numbers are often pretty far apart.
Yep.
And there needs to be obviously some compromise there and some trade-off because we're all after the same goal. We just, obviously the principal owner wants to protect the profits of the overall company and they see this as a portion of that. And that's absolutely true. But a lot of things that they miss are the fact that Revit is a change for everybody. It's not just a change for the drafting department. It's not just a change for your designers or your detailers.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I actually hate the term drafter because we don't have drafters anymore.
Right. Exactly.
If you're a modeler, you have to understand the intricate ins and outs of the system and how it goes together. If you're a drafter, you're just putting lines on a page as you were told to do.
Right.
They don't have to make any sense to you.
Exactly.
But if you can adjust to the fact that Revit is a change for everybody, not just your people in the corner who put your designs on paper, then you actually wind up being ultimately very, very successful. Because not only can your project managers use it as a tool to gain more work, they can also use it as a tool to glean more information about the specific project they're running at earlier stages in the project than they ever have before. And they can compare that with their costs at the current point of the project. They can see if they're going to have some cost overruns or if they're under budget and things are looking really good. It's also going to change the way that you go after getting projects, the way that you estimate, the way that you bid on projects. Your estimators and your bidders have to have a good knowledge of what it takes to create a Revit model, right?
Exactly.
Otherwise, they're going to be bidding everything based upon your old CAD workflow, and you're going to lose money on every project. Revit can be faster than CAD in a lot of ways, but you have to have it set up first, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you're not set up and you don't have an intricate idea of how long per square foot that something might take you, you're going to potentially be off by sometimes a lot of bits in your estimates. And that's a hard thing to recover from. I understand how a lot of companies, you can't just chase the technology ball wherever it goes, right? We can throw away a lot of money and a lot of time on technology. One of the things with Revit is that it's not a ball to chase anymore at this point. It's the ball to catch because we're seeing it getting introduced into the industry in the upper Midwest here, the Silicon Prairie, if you will. We see that.
I hadn't heard that term before. I like it.
You didn't hear that before?
No, that's new to me.
We actually see Revit, and we're the home of the LOD. We actually see that working its way into contract language now, where you will provide a Revit model at the end of the project rather than an O&M manual or as-built documents, and it will be developed to this X level of the LODs, and that will be rolled into facilities maintenance, and that will be rolled into that 60-year life cycle of the building. So we're seeing here in the upper Midwest the BIM BAM boom concepts actually playing out now. That's happening here. You combine that with what we see in the industry with the rise in design build contracts, because building owners are getting wise to this whole workflow and BIM and everything, and how the old process was kind of archaic and slow and had extra steps in it, which led to extra costs. They're shifting focus a little bit and going into design build more. And then you're seeing that combined with other technology and initiatives that are taking place in other countries that have kind of been BIM leaders, that is probably going to make its way here. Now, whether it takes the same form as it has in Canada and China and Germany remains to be seen.
Right.
But you look at those countries now, and they have whole initiatives in Revit where their goal is to have entire municipalities inside of Revit models and then inside of InfraWorks, right? So they could take their entire city of Berlin. There's a big initiative right now for Berlin to do this. The entire city of Berlin created in Revit models, loaded into Autodesk InfraWorks, and then what happens if a monsoon hits Germany? They can analyze
Right.
what they might have to do from a storm sewer perspective, from a emergency planning perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big push now, especially in these other countries where the government and union structures and things like that are a little different, obviously, than America, and so it's maybe a little bit easier for them to enforce a certain way that they want things done.
Right. I'm actually hoping to get another guest in the show to talk specifically about smart cities, which is where a lot of these countries and municipalities are going toward, the ability to have the city actually inform officials because of the information model they've got, the building and infrastructure information model, that they can actually have the city inform and city drive itself in a large part. And in some cases respond itself to some natural disasters, close off major, thoroughfares that, are dangerous in certain scenarios. People don't continue to enter something that's going to be a bad situation, and it can intelligently think for itself. So it's not just human hands on it and human eyes reviewing a building information model. It's now the model itself that's analyzing itself. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just reading an article yesterday about how smart cities are going to be the key to autonomous cars.
Oh yeah.
Smart cities are one of those things that we're talking about now. It's going to happen, whether we like it or not, right? You never get the technology genie back in the bottle. Once it's out, it's out.
Yep.
All that technology, all that smart cities, all that stuff starts with what we do.
Yeah, it's all MEP. I mean, you can't have a smart city without MEP.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when we want to talk about MEP, especially when you talk about facilities maintenance,
Right.
The long-term projections of the profits that you can make with the right Revit model are really immeasurable. I think they're infinite because we haven't really fully unpacked this technology yet. You think about building a building and you look at the 60-year life cycle of that building, where you really save your money is in the operation of that building.
Absolutely.
Right? What it costs to build that building is relatively minuscule compared to the 60-year life cycle cost of the entire facility.
Yep.
And so if you can lower that cost through building automation, through more efficient facilities maintenance, a lot of building owners are very, very interested in that. And of course, all that is MEP. Every single part of that is MEP.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, a couple weeks ago, we were at the AHR Expo in Chicago. The vast majority of manufacturers I talked to there at that expo, and there were over 2,200 of them, were measurement contractors, sensor contractors, sensor developers. They're jumping into this with both feet in terms of facilities maintenance. And that facilities maintenance data obviously all originates inside of a Revit model.
Yep. Absolutely. Now, let's talk about another reason why you guys went to that conference, that ASHRAE conference. This is where I'm going to let you do a little bit of a plug, and I'm going to kind of preface it with a couple of things. So some of you out there who may have begun implementing Revit and you're feeling very challenged by it, there's a lot of work to be done. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes thousands of hours of work to be done before a project can really be run efficiently. It's a lot of work. In some cases, you guys might be watching this and going, well, I want to get into Revit, but I don't have the infrastructure to put that much effort into it in the first place, so I'm not going to get into Revit for that reason. Some of you may have tried to implement Revit and it's crashed and burned in your firm, so you're not trying actively. You tried and it failed for whatever reason, and you really want to get into it. This next little bit of the discussion that I'm going to let Don talk about, it's kind of an internal plug for some tools that he's worked on at CTC, is directly an answer to those types of issues. Now, some of you out there have already implemented Revit and you're running successfully. This might not be for you. I want to let you know that right away. And like Don and I mentioned earlier on in this discussion at CTC, if we think something's not for you, we're going to let you know. Like we don't want you to buy a tool from CTC or buy a process or a workflow or training if it's not something that you need. That doesn't do anybody any good. So this tool here is primarily for companies who really want to use Revit MEP efficiently, and they're not right now. So, Don, you went to AHR to kind of talk and promote this tool set to some degree. What is the tool set, first of all? What is it called?
Well, the tool set is called the Mechanical Electrical Productivity Pack. Okay. And then we've also divided that into two separate pieces, the Mechanical Productivity Pack and the Electrical Productivity Pack.
All right. So it's a productivity pack, and that that is what? Is it content? Is it installed tools? Like, what is the productivity pack? What does that mean?
Okay, let's see if I can conjure up from a couple weeks ago here. Just kidding. I know what it is.
The Cliff Notes version of the AHR presentation, right?
Yeah, exactly. How I describe the productivity packs is that they're not a third-party tool, and that's what makes them extremely unique. Our goal with the productivity packs is not to have you learn a separate piece of software. Our goal with the productivity packs is to take the native Revit environment and tune it to the degree that it does the job that we need it to do. This is where a lot of firms struggle, is because they either get started and they don't get to finish it, or they get it kind of finished and then all of a sudden the goalposts move, like we saw in 2017 with the text editors, and which causes them to go back and redo a bunch of extra work. And so with these productivity packs, they're not just content. I don't like people to call them content packs, because there's so much more than just content in there. Of course, content is part of the pack. But like, say, for example, in the electrical side of the MEPPP, we've pioneered a single line diagram workflow that actually communicates with the Revit model. To my knowledge, we're the only people in the industry who are really doing that right now. And that doesn't require a third-party tool. It's just a different way of thinking about Revit. Yep. We want to give you something that is pre-tuned, preset, able to do all the things that we were all told Revit was going to do for us when we were either chose about it or forced about it, depending upon where you were in the industry. We wanted to make sure that you could take it and you could use Revit for what you need it for. So engineers out there who might be listening, guys, if you're struggling with propagating flow inside of Revit, we made a pack that propagates flow everywhere. We were even propagating things like CFH that aren't native to Revit.
Right.
We're basically doing that with a GPM conversion. So for those of you out there who don't know, Revit can only see fluid in pipes and air in ducts. It can't see air in pipes, right? And we do air in pipes quite often. And so it's a little bit of trickery that's required to get Revit to see quote unquote air in pipe. But we've done things like that.
And you're doing this, Don, at the same time that you're also calculating water in pipes. So you're doing gallons per minute, or whatever flow methodology you want to use. You're doing fixture units and you're doing CFH simultaneously in the same project, right? So it's more than 2 units of measure in piping systems in Revit in one project.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes. Revit can only natively do gallons per minute fixture units in CFM.
Right.
That's it.
And not CFM in pipes,
BTUH,
CFM in duct work.
Correct.
Airflow and duct work, yeah.
Correct. BTUH is not a native Revit measurement, even though you can, it does exist inside of Revit. That's more of a calculated value.
Right.
And MVH doesn't exist in Revit. You have to calculate that value too. But we've done those kinds of things, those things that are very standard inside the industry that everybody uses. We wanted to incorporate a lot of that. We've also incorporated views that help you understand your design a lot faster, taking advantage of simple things inside of Revit. With Revit, content is king. I think everybody knows that. You have to have the right family content. Family content has to be based upon a set of data that is standardized.
Yep.
Since we've done this, now we can go through and create views using simple things like color legends that are going to basically take your ductilator out of your hand and put it inside of Revit.
Yep. And it's accurate too.
Yeah, it's crazy accurate, and it's 100% adjustable.
Yep.
We've got auto sizing VAVs, we've got auto sizing diffusers, all based upon the tightest catalogs. The way that we do that is not even through trickery. That's just having deep knowledge of Revit family content and how Revit family content uses lookup tables and saying, well, hey, why couldn't we take a tightest catalog and create it as a lookup table and tie it to a VAV box?
Right.
We could absolutely do that. Let's do that. And so the automation of the pack has gotten better. The automation of your user experience in Revit has gotten better. The users are going to be able to design more and calculate less.
Yep.
And ultimately, the goal of the mechanical electrical productivity pack is to eventually introduce a standard to the industry. Part of the reason we were at AHR is I was out there talking with a bunch of manufacturers, explaining to them why they want to be in the pack, why they would like to be involved, talking to them about some of the workflows that we've come up with for them that make their lives easier, but make everybody's lives easier as well. We're trying to get a standard going so that if you download a piece of equipment from a manufacturer and you have the MEPPP and you put that piece of equipment in there, it just works. It schedules, it propagates flow, it does what it's supposed to do.
Yep.
All those things are capable with Revit. However, if there's not a standard for the data, that's never going to be capable. We have to have a standard, at least agree on a set of shared parameters that everybody's going to use. And they can't be the same, obviously, as you know, Shawn. It's all based upon GUID logic.
Right.
And we can't have the same named parameters. It doesn't work that way. We all have to agree on one set of shared parameters and have that file be infinitely available across the entire industry.
Exactly. So about how much time, human time and development hours, do you think CTC and our partners has put into the MEP Productivity Pack as it is today?
I don't like answering this question because it always makes my head hurt.
I think last I calculated it, just from my numbers, I think we're over 5,000 hours at this point.
We're well over 5,000 hours, especially if you count continued development since release. That's one thing a lot of people don't understand is that, guys, when we released this, we didn't stop working on it.
Right.
We released it because we got it to a point where we said, okay, this is good for release, let's put it out there. But we've been working on it constantly ever since then. Our partners are working on it, continue to working on it. We're continuing to work on it. One thing that separates us from a lot of other software people out there is that, guys, if you have the MEPPP and you're see things inside of it that don't work properly or that you think need attention, please let us know. We want to fix them.
Our success
we are
is
not
directly gauged.
That's perfect.
Yeah, our success is directly gauged based on your success. If you're not successful in using the tool set, then why are we making it, right? Like, why is CTC putting in a tool set that's not working fully? So also, you mentioned partners. Now, we're not going to name names here just to kind of keep the, to protect the innocent, so to speak. But we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the partners. And we're actually running rapidly out of time. We got about 9 minutes left, so we have to make this a little bit quick. But, CTC, when the productivity packs were being developed in the first place, it wasn't something that was a brainchild of ours. We're out there trying to help companies implement Revit in the first place and get their standards established. And we actually were approached by a couple of different firms who had some really quality ideas. And these were engineers, right, Don? They're engineers who use Revit day in, day out, and have since like 2011 even.
Yeah, if you look at the origins of the electrical productivity pack and the partner that we have with the electrical side, that goes all the way back to 2011. Version year 2011 or 2012, excuse me.
Right.
And that was originally put out because electrical was the original MEP redheaded stepchild.
Right.
They
Isn't it still?
were completely forgotten about. Well, I would argue that it's gotten a little bit better for electrical, better than it has for piping. But
fair enough.
Electrical was the one that really struggled, at least initially, and so the EPP was the first product that came out. A couple of years later, obviously, we recognized that there were issues with mechanical and specific challenges for things other than electrical and MEP, and we wanted to come out with a pack that solved a lot of those problems. Because, here at CTC, all of our MEP applications engineers came from the field, so it's near and dear to us. It's part of who we are. We had these struggles along with everybody else.
Oh yeah.
And so when we were approached by that partner, that was back in 2013.
Yeah.
We released the first MPP in 2014. Because of time constraints and other issues, we weren't able to get the original electrical productivity pack and the original mechanical productivity pack to communicate with each other.
Because they were developed by two different partners, right?
Yes, they were developed by two different partners, two different shared parameter files.
Right.
And if anybody's tried to go through the process of combining shared parameter files in that argument, you know how time consuming it can be.
Oh yeah.
And so when we decided to go after making the mechanical electrical productivity pack, or mechanical electrical plumbing productivity pack, excuse me, we knew that we had to make electrical and mechanical communicate with each other. And we also had to come up with ways for them to communicate with each other when mechanical and electrical are in two separate firms.
Right. Now, I mean, you guys who've sat down and had standards discussions in your own companies, and you know how within your own firm you can have disagreements and disputes about which standard is better. Imagine that same discussion crossing two completely separate firms who in some cases compete against each other.
that compete against each other and specialize in completely different work.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, that wasn't one that I wanted to run towards managing.
We appreciate
But
you managing that, Don.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot because, the challenges are where you learn, right?
Right.
And we learned a lot. We learned a lot about how each other's firms approach Revit, how different trades and different aspects of different trades approach Revit.
Yep.
And we came out with what we feel is a very good solution that allows you to start circuiting earlier and sharing the loads and everything with each other between mechanical and electrical. The downside to some of that is that we had to take liberties with categorical control inside of Revit. And that has proven to be a little bit of a challenge for some firms to accept. But once we show them the workflows and how they work and what we can do with it now, they really adjust relatively quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just pulled up the webpage for that for a moment there. If you guys want to know more about that kit of tools, that productivity pack, certainly you can get a hold of Don at CTC, but you can also go directly to ctcexpresstools.com, see a bit of a video demo on it, and learn more about it yourself and see if it's going to be a good fit for you and your firm. I mean, if it's not, we don't want you buying it, right? That's not the goal here.
Exactly.
This isn't designed to be a sales show. This is designed to be a show that helps the BIM community as a whole. And we feel that this particular pack is a quality tool for the BIM community, specifically in Revit MEP. And that's why it's being offered and why we decided to actually have it on this show, on the BIM broadcast show. So.
Yeah, exactly. If you're a contractor and all you're using is CAD and fabrication and that's your role in a project and you only do plan spec work, you don't do any design build work, the MEPPP is not going to solve any of your problems.
Right.
It was unfortunately not intended to solve some of your problems, and it's not that we're ignoring you. We're definitely looking at some of your problems, but your problems just happen to be a little bit different than the ones inside of Revit. But if you are doing any design build, especially if you're in an area of the country where you have to look at providing Revit deliverables, I think it's second to none in terms of a productivity pack. There's a bit of a learning curve with it because of all the liberties we had to take to give you the functionality, but that's also why we included a 300-page user manual and over 10 hours of training videos inside of that manual. So if you have people who know how to use Revit at a very base level, if you purchase this and you go through the user's manual and make it part of your internal training, you should be up and running pretty quickly.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we're kind of coming to a close here. Don, I really appreciate you giving me some time today to talk about Revit MEP in general and also about the MEP Productivity Pack. Perhaps we can have you on the show again in the future as Autodesk improves their fabrication side. We didn't even get to that discussion today, but in the future, as the fabrication side improves, maybe we can get you back and talk about some of those tools and what users might need to concern themselves with fabrication.
No, that'd be great. Yeah, I would obviously be honored to be invited back, and I'm just here to talk MEP, guys.
Right
Anything
on.
and everything about MEP.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, thank you again for your time. We do have another event coming up here in the near future, or I should say CTC has an event coming up in the near future. It's called Midwest University. Registration is now open. I think you guys are going to definitely want to show up for that if you haven't signed up already. Again, today's date is February 9th, 2018. The actual event happens on March 21st and 22nd of 2018. So we definitely encourage you to get signed up. It's a great event. It's one of the top 3 in the nation for sure for BIM knowledge, especially surrounding the MEP world. We have more MEP classes this year than ever before. So encourage you to do that. So that website is midwest-u.com, and you can go sign up and read more about what goes on at the 2-day event there at Midwest University. With that, thank you all for your time today. We look forward to seeing you in future BIM broadcasts. And now that we've got some of our hardware issues figured out on our side, we hope we can be a bit more consistent with our every other Friday schedule. We have some interesting guests on the clock to come up here in the near future. So look forward to seeing you in next BIM broadcasts. Thank you all and have a fantastic day.